Hi, everyone. I'm Gary Brode from Deep Knowledge Investing. We help hedge funds, portfolio managers, RIAs, and individuals get better equity returns. Today, I'm very excited to be speaking with Andrew Scott. Andrew is the CEO of Inside Asian Gaming, IAG. Andrew, before we get started, I just want to tell people what I think of your publication. For everyone who's listening, I have read Inside Asian Gaming every night for the past 8 years. I do that because, in my opinion, it is the best source of news for the gaming industry in Macau. They cover the rest of Asia very well as well, but I know Andrew's based in Macau, and it is the world's largest gaming market by a huge margin. Their coverage is absolutely incredible. We are currently going through a fascinating time in the Macau gaming market where all of the casinos that have businesses there are being asked to retender. They're basically being told, if you want to stay in business, we're going to talk to you about what you'll need to do. Otherwise, thanks for coming, and please leave your hotel and casino on the way out. I want all of you to know that Andrew and Inside Asian Gaming have done the best job, bar none, in covering the retendering process. His series on the subject is literally the best reading that you can do to get a better understanding of what's happening in this huge gaming market. Outside of actually reading the 20,000 word law itself and then the 5 or 10,000 word amendment to it. So unless you want to get an attorney to read this in Portuguese or Mandarin, I suggest reading Inside Asian Gaming's coverage of this. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here, Gary. Thank you for the very kind words.
Well, we appreciate it. And thanks for keeping us updated on the world's largest gaming market, in my case, for almost a decade. So let's talk about this. Do you want to just take a minute and explain to people the significance of what we're seeing in Macau? Because it really is a once in a 20-year event. And it really does affect the value of tens of billions of dollars of hard assets, tens of thousands of jobs. This is enormous. Do you want to just take a minute and give people context for what's happening here?
Sure, you're exactly right. It is a once in 20-year thing, and in some respects, it's a once in a century thing, because not only is it the whole retendering process, the end of one set of concessions and the start of a new set of concessions, but we're really seeing a seminal change in the way that the governments of Macau and China treat Macau. We're going through that right now. So we've kind of got a lining up of the planets at the moment. We've got this end of the concession, start of the next concession, the end of 20 years from the liberalisation from 2002 to 2022. We've got sort of a change in the nature of China, I guess you could say, and its relationship with the rest of the world, which I think plenty of your viewers probably at least somewhat familiar with, because it's massive international news in what China has been doing in the last year or two or 5, depending on how you look at it. And we're also going through, I know COVID is old news where you're from, but over here, we are in the thick of it right now. And we're in the most damaging COVID event and stage in Macau since the pandemic began. It's 7:05 a.m. here right now. I've already had two COVID tests today at 7 a.m. Every single person in Macau is being forced to take COVID tests on average about once a day, and we've got parts of the city in lockdown. Buildings are in lockdown. Grand Lisboa is closed at the moment, one of the flagship casinos. The flagship casino on Peninsula side, anyway, of SJM is currently closed down with tape around it and guys in bunny suits standing out the front with 500 people trapped inside, guests and staff. So we've got sort of all these things happening at once, and it's a very strange, almost dystopian time to be in Macau right now.
Yeah, and for everyone listening in or watching this video, just think about it for a minute. Try to imagine a scenario where you were tested every single day, where every single person in your town, in your city, were tested every single day, and where the government could just decide, you know what, we're wrapping up this particular hotel, casino, building. No one gets in, no one gets out. It doesn't matter if you have other plans. You are basically a prisoner in a 5-star resort.
And it gets worse than that as well. If you test positive at home, I mean, everybody gets text messages on their phone every day. If you test positive at home, it is your obligation to call the ambulance, not some health worker, but the ambulance, which will come, sirens blaring, to your building, pick you up, take you off to a medical isolation facility. And right now we've got a lot of people in that situation in Macau. So, and a lot of people, close contacts being quarantined. Yeah, we have I can never say that word. Epidemiological investigations are going on for about 13,000 people right now in Macau. Direct one-on-one personal investigations into what those 13,000 people are doing or have been doing, where they've been out of a city of 680,000 people. Every time you walk into a building, you've got to scan a QR code to tell the government you've been in that building. Like, imagine Americans doing that. I don't think they'd be none too pleased. So basically, we're almost in somewhat of a police state at the moment, being justified by what's going on from a health point of view. And all of this because we have 1,000 positive cases, 2/3 of which are asymptomatic.
Right. I think that's important to note. This horrible outbreak there you really have about 300 ill people. You have maybe another 600, 700 people who have tested positive. And I think maybe the tragedy of all this is Macau has essentially been closed for 2.5 years, which has caused a great amount of economic hardship for people, a lot of social isolation. And then to find out, none of this matters, the virus is going to make its way through.
Course, yeah.
Right. Yeah. This
Omicron variant, obviously. I mean, let's not make this a seminar about the virus, but
fair enough.
This Omicron variant's obviously going to get everywhere, and there's nothing that can be done about it. And it's like King Canute trying to push the tide back. It's not going to happen, and it's going to wave through Macau. And we've had only 2 deaths so far: a 100-year-old and a 94-year-old. So it hasn't really been that serious a situation in Macau by international standards. But of course, you have this zero COVID thing in mainland China, which Macau is copying.
Understood. All right. So you're right, though. The rest of the world has been discussing COVID nonstop for 2.5 years. Let's move on to the Macau Gaming Law. The first place I'd love to start is if we go back 20 years, the original gaming licenses were for 20 years, and that really gave people a lot of time to figure out, okay, wait, we can build a multi-billion-dollar facility and get a return on that. Now, based on my reading of the law from Inside Asian Gaming, the new tender is for a 10-year concession with a possible upgrade to 13 years at some point. What are the implications of that? Because if you're building multi-billion-dollar casinos, and you have a very short period of time to earn a return on that, and some period of that time is going to be in, as you noted, a lockdown COVID zero state. What are the implications? What do the gaming companies do?
Well, it's much, much tougher than last time. Let me give you a little bit of background about this. People confuse concessions and licenses. And in fact, we do it in IAG too. We use the words interchangeably, but actually that's not correct. Just for background for people to understand, this is not like what you would have in Nevada or Atlantic City or anywhere like that, where a company comes along and says, can I have a license, please? Applies to the regulator. Regulator gives you a license, and congratulations, your license now operates for as long as you like. It actually has a different legal construct here. So here, gaming is a reserved activity for the government. So actually, it is the government that does gaming, in theory, and it's a legal construct. But then the government, as it's a reserved activity for the government, and then the government says, in practice, we are not the right kind of entity to be running gaming. Private enterprise would do that better than we would, although in theory, the government could do it themselves. So they put it out to tender and give you a concession. So it's the reason why we always refer to them as concessionaires and concessions is we're conceding that activity to you for a period of time, but please don't ever forget that that belongs to us and you have to give it back to us someday. You are just doing it on our behalf and we're allowing you to make some money. Essentially, it's a PPP, a public-private partnership. So, and at the end of this concession period, just like a popcorn stand, you talk about concessions. We own the cinema. We're going to let you run the popcorn stand for a while, but after a while, we can always take it back, like a restaurant and a hotel. So that's how it works. Now, this concession period for 20 years was very, very necessary last time because it was a complete change from a monopoly to a liberalisation. So obviously Stanley Ho's up. Excuse me. Still morning over here. I need a sip of coffee.
All right.
Stanley Ho's STDM company, of course, had the concession and the monopoly concession for 40 years, from 1960 to 2000, and then there was an extension for 2 years to 2002 because they had 40 years to get ready for the next round, and that wasn't long enough. They needed another 2 years, and so it ended up being 2002 to 2022. And just to put this in context, what was going on at the time was, of course, Macau had been handed back. The handover had happened from Portugal back to China on the 20th of December 1999. And part of that handover was under the one country, two systems system that Macau had to generate its own revenue. It could no longer rely on Portugal. Before that, if it ever ran out of money, it could say to Big Daddy Portugal, "Oh, we've run out of money. Could you please send money?" And Portugal would look after it as a colony, so to speak, or protectorate, or whatever they would call it. But under the new law in 2002, that was no longer possible. And moreover, it could not go to China for its money either, because under the one country, two systems system, the economy of Macau is, in theory at least, completely isolated. It raises its own taxes, it pays its own bills, has its own budget, has its own currency. So Macau really had to stand on its own 2 feet as if it were a country of its own, with its own monetary system and internal budget. And this is why the then Chief Executive Edmund Ho put it out to liberalisation, because he felt that he really wanted Wynn, to be frank. He wanted Wynn to come on in and build something fantastic and really up the GGR and therefore up the tax take and therefore make Macau self-sufficient. And that was what it was all about. And of course, so everything was different. It was a massive systemic change. They licensed 3 license holders. Oh, there you go. I just did it. Concessionaires. And we became Wynn. Stanley Ho got one, Wynn got one, and Galaxy got one with their then partner, Venetian. And then, so we needed that 20 years to build. It was a classic boot operation: build, own, operate, transfer. So the idea was, okay, we'll give you 20 years. You need to build, own, operate, and then transfer back to us. Thank you. We'll have the casinos back. So you're just doing it. You got 20 years to make your money, and then sayonara, you're out of town, and we've got all these nice shiny casinos. Thank you very much. Now, that was 20 years ago. Now, fast forward 20 years to now, 2022, their logic is, well, hey, you've built the casinos. They're there. They're already in place. You don't need 20 years anymore because you don't need to build and create these properties. They already exist. I see some flaws in that.
Such as deferred maintenance?
Well, certainly deferred maintenance. Phase 2s and phase 3s and phase 4s that are still in the books that need to be built. I mean, when I did a master's degree in integrated resort management at the University of Macau that I finished in 2019. And my thesis was about what makes one integrated resort more profitable than another in Asia. And one of the things that I conclusions I came to in that thesis was about the investment cycle. And we had invested at that point about US $35 billion in Macau in terms of all the existing casinos in mainly in Cotai, a few on the peninsula. And there was still about another 25 billion to go in terms of like Galaxy Phase 3, Galaxy Phase 4, Studio City Phase 2, Wynn Phase 2. So that this investment cycle is by no means over, and it's been slowed dramatically by what's been happening in Macau. So we have probably another 25 billion in books investment to go. We've got refurbishment, as you say. 5-star hotels need to be refurbished every, let's say, 7 years to keep the kind of top 5-star, 6-star international standards which are expected in Macau. So 10 years, it isn't that long. especially when you know the first year or two is going to be wiped out with COVID maybe, and especially you've now got to pay back all this money you borrowed over the last 2.5 years to survive through COVID. The borrowings of these 6 entities, these 6 concessionaires, have gone from $5 billion US to $20 billion US over the past 2.5 years. So the 10-year, there's a lot of implications for the 10-year cycle. Honestly, frankly, it's not long enough in my view, but if you take the view that they're pretty much going to renew the concessions each time and it's going to be the same companies continuing, it's not a renewal, it's a retendering. But if you take that view, you can say, well, it may be 10 years, but we're probably going to get another 10 after that and so forth. But that's by no means set in stone either.
Right. Well, that was the bet that the casino executives were taking, right? If you look at the Parisienne, that was only built, maybe 3 years ago, something like that.
Yeah. Yes,
the Wynn Palace about 3 years ago. Some of the, the really smart gaming operators were building right into their deadlines. And I think they were assuming 2 things. One, they'd be able to retain their concessionaire licenses. And 2, that it wouldn't really be 10 years. And I think anybody building now, or even just replacing the carpets and the furniture, or just doing that maintenance, right? They have to be assuming 10 years, because I know if it were me and it were 10 years, I'd do no maintenance on this thing. And if the government's going to take it over in a decade, you'd give them a non-functioning, completely run-down place, right?
Well, there's a couple of comments on that. First of all, it's only the casino that reverts. It's not the non-casino parts of the property. And I guess probably later on you're going to ask me about this concept of reversion. Yep. Perhaps we leave it till then. But there is some controversy over what is the casino. It's not as simple as you might think it is. So it's only the casino that reverts. So that's one comment. Another comment I would make is that I would only invest in the first 3 years of a 10-year cycle. I mean, sure, let's invest in the first 3 years, get our money back over the next 5, give ourselves a buffer of 2 years. Why invest dramatically in the last 7 years of that 10 until you get the license again? Oh, there you go, I just did it. The concession again.
Understand.
And then maybe in years 1, 2, 3 of the next 10 years, that invest. So you might see this kind of sine wave of investment cycle now, because it's become so short. It's gone from 40 years to 20 years. Now we're talking 10 years. And some people were even submitting 5 to 8 years for the in the submissions to the DICJ when all this was going on. But the government settled on 10. I should also just mention, you mentioned about possible 3-year extension. That's purely at the option of the government, only if there are extraneous circumstances. There's some reason that they feel it needs to be extended. It's not really commercial. It's if there's some, we haven't done it in time, we haven't got ready in time, which is a very Macau thing, or we're in the middle of a pandemic, for example, could be a good example. And by the way, Wynn Palace actually opened 6 years ago. It feels like 3 years ago, because it's only been 3 years of actual action. The last 3 years have been treading water and going backwards.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. So I have to figure that the people that are building now, and they are continuing construction, they have to be figuring the same thing, that at the end of 10 years, the government isn't going to say, thanks so much, here's a plane ticket on the way out. They have to be assuming there will be some sort of retendering process, in 2032 or around then.
Well, I think there's a lot of this going on at the moment, people crossing their fingers behind their back and kind of ignoring the problem. I think so much, in poker, we say pot committed, right? A lot of these guys are so pot committed that they just can't get out, and they've committed so much money and their lives are wound up. And these are the leaders and founders of these companies that they just, the assumption is that the current prevailing assumption is that it will just be a rubber stamp and it will be the same 6 companies again. And to be honest, every indication along the way over the past, let's say, 9 months, where this has really started to heat up has pointed towards that. And at every point when the conspiracy theorists have come along and said, oh no, this is going to happen and there's going to be this dramatic change, they've been proved wrong. The Macau government's actually been quite stable and actually even quite surprisingly willing to listen. They put out a draft document at the beginning of the consultation process back there in September. They had a 45-day consultation process, which we were very involved in. We made a submission to that process and we appeared at a number of the hearings that the DICJ had. And the final document that came out as a result of that consultation process in December remarkably did address a number of things that the industry had pointed out. Hey, there's an issue with this. There's a practical problem with this. You know, you want it here, we want it here. Can we at least go to here? And the government went, yeah, okay, we will. And so they were surprisingly compromising. And then again, the next stage was when the first draft law came out in January. They compromised yet again. And the Legislative Assembly asked for more submissions from the public. And we made some submissions to that too. And they changed the draft law again. So they probably didn't go as far as the concessionaires would like, but they went more than I expected. And so far, it looks like those six will. I mean, of course, they're going to. I hope they don't prove me wrong. But if you were to ask me what is the probability of those same six being, which I'm sure is a question you're planning to ask me later on, and I'll give you the answer now. Yeah. Probably 85%.
Yeah, look. I agree with you on that. I don't think it was a coincidence that they have six concessionaires and they made arrangements for there to be six going forward. If they wanted to light a fire under people, they would have said, we'll have five.
Maximum of six. Maximum of six. Yeah.
Fair enough.
It's not six and no more, no less. It's maximum of six. Yeah.
Fair enough. Still, I agree with you. I think the most likely scenario, I think they were signaling, okay, we've got six in business. And, you know, play ball and you can stay in business.
Exactly.
Which, you know, when you're operating effectively in China, whether you're on the mainland or not, it's always play ball and you can stay in business.
Exactly. I mean, you've got to get used to the arbitrariness over here. There's no guarantees. Do as you're told. Understand the environment, read the room, understand what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do, and operate within those parameters, and we'll pretty much leave you alone, is how things work over here. Yeah. So you've got to, in the early days, in the early years, I think, a few companies from the US, particularly, I don't think it's any secret that Mr. Adelson had some problems early on, but over time he learned how it worked, to his credit, and adapted to be within that sort of operating methodology. When I first moved to Macau and to China, I found it very difficult, the lack of clarity and the lack of surety. And I think some of the people listening to this webinar might be scratching their head going, you're investing tens of billions of US dollars on a should be okay kind of situation. The answer is yes. Yes, we are. It's a lot of people think, oh, but it's all been agreed behind the scenes. And you know, it really is a bit of flying by the seat of the pants. But as long as you play ball, as you said, things should be okay, and hitherto have basically been okay, excepting this drama that we've had in terms of the market collapsing.
Yeah, well, you know, you just mentioned Sheldon Adelson. I'll tell you, I was a huge admirer of him and his ability to just really see the market differently, to build what the public wanted. I do know people personally who have worked directly with him, and they have nothing but incredibly positive things to say about him as both a gaming executive and a person. And I did always get a smile seeing him for years and years at the top of the IAG 50 every December when you would put that out. And I just always like seeing him at the top of the list.
Look, he was, I mean, just on that, I mean, there's no doubt he was a tough cookie and a hard taskmaster, but who isn't when they're worth the kind of money that he was worth and doing the kind of things that he was doing? And I think if you were good, he treated you well. And if you weren't, well, he didn't suffer fools gladly, and good on him, you know, and done for what he did.
Right. No one ever said he was easy. They said he was a gentleman.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah.
All right, so let's move on. a minute, because one of the key things, and you've written a lot about this, but it's a really important point. There is a change in the new law on the local shareholding requirement. And I know it's been something that really concerned people. It was an issue for companies like Las Vegas Sands, where you have Las Vegas Sands and then Sands China, which is really Macau based. And so, there were questions. How do we handle this? Can you just talk about that? Help people understand a little bit what the implications are for the local shareholding requirement and how it's changed.
Sure. So, well, in a nutshell, it's gone from 10% to 15%. But when I say it, what exactly is it? So they call it they have this expression, the managing director, which is really a misnomer. It's not a managing director at all. It's basically a compulsory requirement that the concessionaire entity, the entity that's given the concession, which is not a listed company, it's a local Macau SA company, be owned 10% by a local Macau resident, permanent resident. Now, when this law first came out, ostensibly it's to give some connection to the local, the city, to have a 10%, somebody who owns at least 10% of the concession, who understands Macau. They're a Macau permanent resident, which means they were either born and bred in Macau, or they got residency, which requires you to live in Macau for 7 years and blah, 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 jump through a whole heap of hoops. So the idea was to give some sort of connectivity to the city. It wasn't a totally foreign company coming in, 100% foreign, that didn't understand the city. But in practice, it hasn't worked like that. In practice, this 10%, all 6 companies found a way to make this 10%. In Australia, where I'm from, we have an expression of Clayton's 10%, which is basically a fake 10%. So yes, on paper, they do own 10%, but there's usually some kind of legal construct around that. There's a nominee agreement that they hold it nominally, and the ultimate beneficial owner is in fact the entity that owns the other 90%. Excuse me. Or each of the 6 have a slightly different way of dealing with this. But the reality is that 10% is not a beneficial ownership, 10%. And in the case, I've just run through who the 6 are. In Galaxy's case, it's Neto Valente, who's an advisor to the company, and he is the chairman of the Law Society, president, I should say, of the Law Society here. In Sands' case, they found a gentleman, Mr. Wu, who is basically holds it nominally. In Melco's case, it's Lawrence Ho. In SJM's case, it's Angela Leung. In Wynn's case, it's Linda Chen. And in MGM's case, it's Pansy Ho. So sometimes it's the principal, sometimes it's a nominee, but in all cases, it's not really a beneficial 10%. So it was increased in the new law from 10% to 15%, but it appears, we still don't 100% know, but it appears that it's also still going to be treated as, okay, the way you've constructed it at the moment, we're happy with that. We're okay with that. Right. So the obvious question is, well, why increase it from 10% to 15%? And I think there's 2 possible answers to that. I think the first answer is, it looks good on paper. Like, look, we're increasing local ownership. Isn't that a good thing? Right. So they could come out and say, look, we're increasing local ownership by 50%, from 10% to 15%. Right. Isn't that wonderful? So maybe it's an optics thing, but maybe there's something a little bit more behind it too. Maybe. So I like to refer to the sort of salami slicer method. And what I mean by that is, in China, often if the government wants to institute change, they'll do it like slicing a salami in a deli. They'll just make little changes, thin little slices, which no one individual change is particularly noticeable or has effect. But all of a sudden you wake up a few years later and half the salami is gone. So what happened, right? So maybe it's in preparation for something later. Maybe.
Right. So basically you've gone from Clayton's 10% to Clayton's 15%, and the next step might be a non-Clayton's 15%.
Maybe. Obviously that'd be a big step, and maybe that's a 2032 thing, or maybe there's an idea that maybe we might do that. Let's give ourselves the option. No one's going to complain about going from a Clayton's 10 to a Clayton's 15%. They're all just going to go, okay, sure. Right. We've got bigger fish to fry. You want to do that? We're not going to complain. So I don't think, so it doesn't make any difference from a practical point of view. Remember, it is only the concessionaire entity itself, which is a privately held Macau registered SA company held by the parent, either directly or indirectly. So if it is treated as a so-called fake 10%, the language they usually use is non-economic, non-voting. It doesn't have voting power and it's not worth anything.
Right.
And so, again, why do it? Well, it looks good and there was a logic to it and the government seems to be okay with leaving it. We don't actually know 100% yet. We've got to let the next 6 months play out. But that's the so-called managing director, who is not a managing director at all.
Well, that's the kind of thing that could work out pretty well for the Ho family.
Yes.
We'll see for everybody else. Now, I know one of the things that we were talking about the other night is you mentioned there's a national security provision in the new law. What's going on with that? And how is gaming a national security issue?
Everything is a national security issue in China,
right.
Or can be made to be. Look, this concept of national security has become more pronounced. And before, when I referred to the sort of the changing posture of the People's Republic of China, and perhaps at some point, maybe not in this webinar, maybe another, we should talk about the difference between China and Macau, because a lot of people don't understand it. But let's leave that for now.
All right.
The posture has been more belligerent, let's be honest. It has been more aggressive. It has been more, perhaps you would say, self-confident, as China has grown economically and has been through the boom it's been through for the past 2 or 3 decades. It's not content with being a secondary power anymore. It wants to be a major power on the global stage. Xi Jinping, President Xi, has become, certainly a global figure. There's no doubt about that. And so issues of national security come to the fore. So we've seen this be quite a controversial issue in Hong Kong, with the passing of a national security law in Hong Kong. There was a similar national security law passed in Macau with a whimper. In Macau, we're the good little brother who behaves ourselves as far as the PRC is concerned. There's the naughty brother over to the east, Hong Kong, which keeps on getting into trouble. But we know where our bread's buttered, and it's buttered with Chinese people. Thank you very much. So we tend to go, yes, sir, no, sir, 3 bags full, sir, and just let these things go through. So because the concept of national security has come to the fore in China, it's also come to the fore in Hong Kong and Macau. There'll be a new version of the Macau national security law passed in due course, but it's also now been inserted into the gaming law. Why is it a national security issue? Well, there's so much money involved. And it's all about the economic security of the money. And the money, China sees the money that Macau generates as our money. It comes from our players from China. This is us that's feeding you this money. So that money you've got there in your little pot of gold over there in Macau, don't forget where it came from. It's really our money. So there's a sense of that. So I think and I think also it provides them with what I call a get out of jail free card, right? So if for whatever reason, all of a sudden, mid-term, mid-concession, they suddenly go, oh my God, we don't want this guy having a concession anymore. We don't want this company anymore. National security issues here, right? We can implement, we can push the button and say, look, there's some national security implications here. And I think it's a very broad, open to interpretation. You know what they say, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, right? So it's all up to interpretation. So it would be pretty easy to classify companies from outside of China as some kind of national security threat. And don't think China is alone in this. Look at what the US does with Huawei, for example, right? Same thing. It's really the same thing. So don't really be pointing the finger at China and going, oh, that's so arbitrary. It happens all over the world. We've done it in Australia too, where I'm originally from. We've said no Huawei. So if the Chinese government or the Macau government was suddenly to say, you know what, this American company now represents national security threat. Sorry, your concession is cancelled as of now. They could do it.
Yeah, fair enough. I think the Huawei comparison is an interesting one. I don't think at least for the US, it's not so much a matter of that it's a Chinese company. I think it's the issue of data collection.
Sure.
And there is Huawei equipment right next to US military bases, and that their hardware is there's data collection involved there. And I think that's
sure. But hey, I don't think there isn't data collection involved over here.
Fair enough. I don't know that a roulette wheel is the same thing.
It's not a roulette wheel. It's a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure with leadership, big companies that sometimes have connections to national governments. This is what they would say. I'm playing devil's advocate here.
Fair enough.
Right? This is what they would say. That is what they would say. Some of these senior executives formerly had positions with national security clearances in the US. That's what they would say. I'm not espousing, to make it clear, I'm not necessarily espousing that. I'm just saying how it could be. I mean, how it could be implemented, how a button could be pushed. But again, look, I think if a company plays by the rules, I don't think it's a problem. I just think it's in there as a get out of jail free card. You don't always use your get out of jail free cards when you play Monopoly, right?
Right. No, and you make a really strong persuasive argument, and there's no question that, in the US, individuals like Sheldon Adelson and Steve Wynn at times did have a line into the White House.
Exactly.
So you make a good point. All right, let's move on. Let's talk about the concession tender process, because we're just getting it started. I know the new law, or at least the amendment that's going to constitute the new law, came out, I want to say 48 hours ago, something like that. Certainly too short a time to completely analyze it. But based on, where you guys are so far, and I know, again, for everyone listening, if you want to stay on top of this, Inside Asian Gaming, IAG, would be the place to go for that. I know you guys will have fantastic analysis on it. What's your early take?
Okay, so you're absolutely right. Something did happen about 48 hours ago. It's 7:30 a.m. Thursday here. What came out late afternoon on Tuesday. So we've just basically had one working day to look at it so far. What came out was, actually the law was passed in June, and what came out on Tuesday night was the initial dispatch for the tender process. So, and how they did it was kind of, some might say, a bit of a lazy way of doing it. Instead of issuing tender documents, they said, refer to the tender documents 20 years ago, and here's a list of amendments. So the tender documents from 20 years ago are about 20,000 words. It's a big set of documents, and there's about 5,000 plus words of amendments. So that's quite confusing. You haven't got one document. You've got to take a document from 20 years ago. You've got to take an amendment document that says this clause stays the same. This clause, change the word and to or, change the word, 10 to 20. So the first thing we've got to do is take the old one and go through and do a massive editing job before we can even look at it. So we're doing that as we speak, and we're looking at it. But the very early take is that there are no surprises, which is good, because there could have been. There might have been surprises. They might have come out and said, you know what, the law says maximum 6, but under the tender, we're going to have 5. So one of you guys has to go. Or maybe 6 of you guys have to go and we get 5 new guys, right? They could have done that. They could have said, the law says maximum 10 years, but we're going to give you 8. And they could have added additional things, but they haven't. So that's good. They have also issued the application forms as well, which are actually in Portuguese, Chinese, and English, which is great. So as they were 20 years ago, by the way. So the law is in Chinese and Portuguese. The regulations are in Chinese and Portuguese. The amendments to the regulations are in Chinese and Portuguese, but the actual forms that need to be filled out by the tenderers are in Chinese and Portuguese and English, so which is quite handy. look, no real surprises. We still don't know whether we're going to be having an open tender or a restricted tender. An open tender means anybody can apply. You can apply, Gary, if you want. If you want to run a concession in Macau, good luck. I can apply. Any of our viewers can apply. A restricted tender, there are some initial qualifications, minimum requirements before you're allowed to be a tenderer. Not much difference between the two, really, because the open tender will necessarily become a restricted tender because there will be criteria within the tender process that will eliminate unqualified rather than disqualified, unqualified tenderers anyway. So so that's our early take. And I suppose the next thing for you to ask me, I'm asking the questions as well as the answers here.
Yeah, this is great. I'm going to take a nap.
It's probably the criteria, right? That's what everyone's interested in. Like, what criteria did they come up with? So I've actually scribbled them down here. We seems to be in terms of criteria, seems to be 7. None of which are surprises. So there's one called the variable part of the premium. We're still trying to figure out exactly what that means. There's money paid by each of the concessionaires to the Macau government. They pay a 30 million MOP. All these numbers divide by 8 for US dollars. They pay a 30 million MOP, which is Macau Patakas, flat fee, all 6 of them each year. They also pay 300,000 per VIP table, 150,000 per normal table, and 1,000 per slot machine per year as a flat fee. Divide all those numbers by 8 for US dollars. This is before they pay their taxes on GGR and their levies as well. There's quite a lot of impost on them. So we're not quite sure what variable part of the premium refers to. Probably it refers to the how much that they would pay per table per slot machine. The second one is generation of foreign customers. Macau has been heavily reliant on mainland China customers, as everyone knows, and they want to get non-mainland Chinese customers to Macau. Yeah, good luck, I say. Right. Not an easy task. Third one is experience, pretty standard kind of one. Benefits from their investment in gaming and non-gaming. So what benefits we brought to Macau by the investment? Basically, what's your investment plan? How much money are you going to invest? Casino management plan, kind of a general description of how you plan to run your casino. Another one is supervision and prevention of illicit activities. This is now a much bigger deal given what we saw at the end of last year regarding junkets and the arrest of Alvin Chow, the head of Sun City, and the head of Tuck Chun, and some others as well. So there's a big crackdown on illicit activity in casinos, and this will be, I think, a big feature of the tender. And finally, CSR obligations. There is quite a demand for corporate social responsibility from these companies to Macau. Not only are they now required to pay a 5% levy under the new law, it was 4%. It was actually up to 5% in practice. They charged 4%, but now it's not up to 5%. It's 5%, no more, no less. Basically went to CSR efforts. And they've actually, in the new law, stipulated the criteria of CSR. SME, I've just scribbled them down here. SMEs, diversification, labour rights, hiring people with disabilities, public service activities, supporting scientific, educational, environmental, cultural, sporting endeavours. I mean, they just want these concessionaires to do it all. So not only do they have to pay their levy, but on top of all that, we want you to do all these other activities that you pay for yourself as well. So in a nutshell, we think that is the criteria that will be, of course, financial capacity goes without saying, will be looked at.
Got it. All right. So what do you think the timeline is? I know they extended everybody's concession through the end of the year. As you pointed out earlier, things don't always get done on time in Macau. Do they get it done by the end of the year? And at what point do you think we get the announcement of who the winning 6 will be, or as you said, maximum of 6?
Okay, I'll give you. I'll be very succinct, which is very unlike me. Do they get it done by the end of the year? Yes, I strongly believe they do. They're super motivated to get it done by the end of the year. There's lots of clarity that by hook or by crook, we're getting this done December 31. So that's it. That's a yes. How do we break that down? Well, first of all, they will appoint a tender commission. They've issued the dispatch letter. There'll then be a clarification period where the concessionaires have an opportunity to ask questions, get clarification on what the government means by certain things in their documents. And then there'll be a submission deadline. I'm currently estimating the submission deadline to be somewhere maybe in October. Probably makes sense. These submissions, they're going to be weighty tomes. They're going to be 1,000-page documents. The actual forms to fill out won't be that much, but there'll be huge attachments of what they've done in the past, their track record, and what they plan to do in the future. There's without a doubt, all 6 concessionaires currently have sizable teams working on the creation of this big submission. I think around the end of October will be when the deadline for that will be. Then there'll be, as with all open tenders in Macau, there'll be an opening of the tenders. So all the tenders will be invited into a room. The tender commission will all be sitting up the front. The tenders will all be sitting at the back. And all the tenders will be on a desk, right? And this will all be done in paper, by the way, not electronically. This will all be done old school with red wax seals on the tender documents.
Beautiful. And
then there'll be a ceremonial opening of the tenders. I've actually witnessed this because IAG has tendered for some things in Macau in the past. So I'm familiar with the process. It'll be the same process. And then they'll all get to look at each other's tenders a little bit. And then there'll be a bit of argy-bargy, as Australians like to say, which means a little back and forth of does your tender comply with the requirements of the tender, of the rules around the tender? If any don't, they'll be eliminated. They'll get 2 or 3 days to appeal. That process will go through for both the requirements, what they call the requirements of the tender, and then also the documents of the tender. There's documents and then there's proposals in Macau tenders. So first the documents, what they call documents, of course the proposals are also a document, very confusing. The documents are all the information about you as an entity, your financial capacity and your legal status, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They'll go through those documents. They'll clarify whether you meet the requirements, the criteria. If you don't, you'll be eliminated. There'll be a 2 or 3 day appeal process for the elimination. Then they'll get to the proposals. They'll assess the proposals. Then they will enter into a negotiation phase. So then the tender commission will negotiate and discuss with the tenderers their proposals. They can do this one-on-one with individual tenderers, or they can do this as a group in an open forum, or a bit of both. So I think that'll take another month, maybe. And a lot of these estimates are based upon the finish line of December 31. So I think about another month. And then I think by the time those negotiations are finished and finalized, we'll see draft contracts early December, draft new concession contracts. So each concessionaire will sign a concession contract with the government. And I think you will see the CE issue the winners by dispatch in the Macau Gazette mid-December. It's going to be tight. It's going to be tight. I think mid-December he will issue, these are the winners, provisional to the satisfaction of these, contingent upon these ticking these boxes. And then the companies will have to tick a few final boxes in the last fortnight of December. And then I think what will happen is possibly on the morning of December 30, which is the last working day of the year, this is very Macau style. Right. We'll see a signing ceremony at Government House where all 6 of them go along and sign the concession contract, maybe that morning. I think it's a Friday. And then there's one more step. Even after the concession contract is signed, the Secretary for Economy and Finance needs to issue a letter saying you may begin operations. Or I think we may see that letter issued in the afternoon of December 30, saying, congratulations, you may begin operations as of midnight on January the 1st, which is Sunday. Happy New Year. pop your champagne corks, and enjoy continuing running your casino from Sunday. So I think that's probably how it's going to play out. It may not be quite so melodramatic at the end of December, but it may well be.
You know, Andrew, I've got two really weird thoughts for you. One is waiting until the last minute may not be a good idea when you're testing everyone for COVID twice a day. Anybody test positive and this thing is going to run into 2023.
They'll find a solution to that.
I'm sure. This is a weird question, given that we've spent the last basically 4 years with everyone who's operating in Macau saying, we want to stay, we want to stay, we want to stay. And everyone's shareholders have been afraid that the government would come out and say, hey, guess what? The new retendering is going to be 4 companies, you know, and wondering if they were going to be kicked out. As you and I have talked about, there have been tens of billions of dollars of additional capital expenditures, phase 3, phase 4, for a lot of these companies. Is there any possibility that one of these 6 concessionaires says, you know what? At this point, you guys have kept us locked down with the zero COVID thing for 3 years. You've gone to a 10-year, contract. And we don't even know how many of those 10 years we're going to be able to operate because of zero COVID. The taxes are higher, as you said. You know, they want schools, parks, and a pet bunny along with it. You know, the government is asking for a lot. They just carved out the entire junket industry. And with, as you talked about, the national defense aspects of this, they could easily say, hey, yeah, thanks for playing, but you're gone. We have a reason, right? Is there any possibility one of these companies just says, you know what? Enough already. It's easier to do business in Indonesia, Vietnam, maybe South Korea eventually, Vietnam. There are other options. And as we've seen in Japan, if the government asks too much, there is a point where people say, you know what, enough already. We're going to go do business someplace where it's easier. So is this crazy or what's going to happen with that?
Well, it's not crazy. You stole my opening line as you were talking. I was thinking, they're doing a bit of a Japan, aren't they?
I mean, you saw for years and years, people were saying, we want to be in Japan. We want to be in Japan. The Osaka license was going to be the big one. Everyone thought Las Vegas Sands would get it. Eventually, everybody who even talked about bidding said, you know what, enough. And all of a sudden, Osaka, which was going to be the crown jewel, is now they have one bidder, which means that bidder has the ability to maybe say, maybe not so much on this. And now there's negotiation where before, right, and they overplayed their hand.
Look, I think the difference between, all of that is absolutely true. All of that makes perfect sense. I think the one big difference about Macau, the one thing that Macau's got that, let me start my answer again. Let me say this. In anywhere else in the world, yes, I think you're bang on right. And I think that people would have long gone by now. But this is Macau. And Macau has had GGR nudging on 40 billion US in a year. And everybody knows that. We've seen it. It's not a theory. It's not a theory. It's not like, people were talking about, Japan could be a $25 billion market. Well, yeah, sure. Some analyst, some consultant did a study and drew concentric circles on a diagram and did a little Excel sheet and came up and said 25 billion. But this is 40 billion and it's had proof of concept. We've done it.
Yeah, they were doing that back in 2014.
We're doing that back in 2013. Yeah. And 2019 was 36.9, I think, billion.
Right. Yeah.
So if it wasn't for government, if it wasn't for regulation, if it wasn't for the rules of the game and the market was just thrown open, I shudder to think how big this market could be. It could be 40 billion, 50 billion, 70 billion, 100 billion. It really could be. That people will shoot me down in flames, right? But China is just going to keep getting bigger and bigger and richer and richer. You've got freshly minted millionaires. Even now, with what China's going through, you've got freshly minted millionaires every single day. And that is in the back of the minds of all these 6 companies. And all these 6 companies know that. So boy, are they taking a lot of pain. I mean, they're in the ring taking hook after uppercut after, they're just getting hammered right now. And they had it good. They had it very, very good for a lot of years. They made a lot of money, but boy, have they paid the price now, and they're hanging in there. Could a company do that? Look, I don't believe so yet, but I mean, everybody has their limit, right? Everybody has their breaking point. Every company has their breaking point. Right now, they're losing about nearly $1 billion a quarter. I think one of the analysts, I think it was Morgan Stanley, said they were losing $800 billion a quarter, and that was before the current lockdown we're in now. It must be $1 billion a quarter now. $1 billion US a quarter between the 6 of them going down the tube. I mean, how long can you do that for? I don't know. But when your debt's gone from 5 billion to 20 billion, and your investments maybe 35 billion in time, I'm treating the industry as a whole here. It's starting to get shaky. It's starting to get really shaky. Are banks going to keep throwing money at these casinos? Are their bonds going to be good? I don't know. At some point, one of the companies might go, you know what? As you say, see you later. So look, I don't think all 6 have said that all 6 have come out and said, we are re-tendering. We're looking forward to the process. We support the government, et cetera, et cetera. When the law passed, in June, all 6 of them issued press releases within 18 hours saying it's wonderful that the law has passed. We support the government and we look forward with eagerness to the tender process. Yeah. So on the face of it, they're saying we're in, but that rubber band is being pulled and pulled and pulled and pulled, and it hasn't broken yet, but at some point, if it keeps going like this, yes, it will.
All right, Andrew, we are running really short on time here. We want to be respectful of the time of our guests, the people watching. I'm going to lightning round here. I'm coming at you with 2 questions, but they're easy ones. One, I still have more questions for you. You are endlessly fascinating on this topic. I want to know, will you come back, do another webinar with us in the future? Can people look forward to that?
You painted me into a corner. Of course, I have to say yes. Yeah, of course. No problem at all. Happy to do that.
Great. Okay. So legal department, we've got Andrew on record there. Okay, great. And then the other question, besides going to Inside Asian Gaming and subscribing, how can people find you? What are you guys doing? How can people who are interested in your very unique expertise take advantage of that?
Well, short answer is you can go to asgam.com, asgam.com, and find out about Inside Asian Gaming. And I'll certainly subscribe to that. I'm pretty easy to find on LinkedIn. Just type Andrew W. Scott into LinkedIn and you'll find me. The W's there because Andrew Scott's such a common name. So it's got to differentiate somehow. A lot of people don't realize that we're more than a media company. We're both a media company and an events company. And also we have this sort of business services consulting business. So we do consulting to institutional investors and other, any sort of buy side kind of folks who are interested in getting, decent on the ground analysis about Macau and intelligence on Macau from Westerners who understand them, but also have very good Chinese connections. So we do that as well as another part of our business. So we sort of have these 3 parts to our business: the media side, the event side, and the business consulting side. So yeah, find me on LinkedIn or through our website, asgam.com.
All right. Sounds great. So what I can tell everybody is Andrew does respond to messages on LinkedIn. That's how I got in touch with him. And I don't know what else to tell people other than I read Inside Asian Gaming every night. I recommend that everyone go subscribe and read it because it is the best information that you can get on the largest gaming market in the world. I'm Gary Brode from Deep Knowledge Investing. Andrew Scott, thank you so much for your time today. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much, Gary. And thank you for the very kind words. Our staff are really, really good, work very, very hard to do a good job. And so thank you. I'll be passing that on to them and they'll, of course, see this webinar. So thanks for the kind words.
Terrific. Thanks so much. And everyone have a great night, or in your case, a safe morning.
Thank you.